Hello, United Nations. Don't you like this image coming in from the Kashmir Valley and this image as well? I'm asking this question because United Nations has released a bizarre, nasty statement against G20 meetings being held in Kashmir. Some of the chosen words were brutal and repressive denial of democratic rights of the Kashmiri Muslims. The UN ignoring the fact that it was local residents who have not only welcomed the meetings, but are participating in organizing these meetings as well. But then the statement goes on to claim that an independent expert has added that Hindus from outside regions are moving into Kashmir to change the demographics. This usual dangerous tirade is usually peddled by the terror groups to justify killings of innocent people and is now being stated by the United Nations as well. As a journalist, I challenge the UN to prove where has the demography change taken place in Kashmir Valley against the Muslim population. And is it anything different that from people from Kashmir who are settling in any big city across India? If you are a UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues, you would know that the minority in Kashmir are the Hindus who have been turned to less than 1% in most parts of the valley now due to targeted killings and ongoing persecution by the terrorists. I'm quoting the 2011 census data here. So when was the last time United Nations gave out a strong statement to combat this rising global concern of jihadist extremism that has plagued Kashmir Valley for many decades now? If you think Kashmir is worse right now, what is this?
And forces are trying to stay at bay, but the youngsters are only coming ahead, and we are trying to in fact reach out to them and them as well and seek their opinions. But the images in itself speaking in a residential area here in Pampur.
This is My Ground report filed in 2017 when children were encouraged to join in violent street protests, recruited as militants even by Pakistan-backed terror groups. If the CRPF opened fire at the protest, leading to casualties or pellet injuries, narrative was built of killing children instead of diving deep into the dangerous strategy of secessionist groups. You don't get to see all this mass violence now anymore in the Kashmir Valley. But notice this. United Nations statement on Kashmir gets shared by Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, the Foreign Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, a nation that has blatantly interfered in Kashmir and ruined its people. So I wondered if I was the only one disappointed and slightly shocked by this UN statement written on hearsay. But then I went on to research and realized that many countries have been regularly expressing shock at the spineless actions by the United Nations, and since a few years now, United Nations has also earned itself a nickname, the Toothless Tiger. United Nations Security Council constitutes about 5 permanent member states: USA, Russia, Britain, China, and France. China recently used the veto power to avoid any action against them despite growing criticism over the COVID-19 pandemic. Many nations objected, but nothing was done. This structure results in misuse of veto power, often blocking key decisions that are needed by nations that have little representation. An important function of the United Nations is also human rights. So instead of charging at India, did the United Nations not see the aggression and violations that China has inflicted on Uyghur Muslims despite outrage at the UNSC? Were there ever sanctions that were put against China? In recent times, United Nations has failed to stop the Ukraine-Russia war, for example, which has now gone beyond a year. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, addressing the Security Council, said either work for peace or dissolve itself. This is similar to how the US quest for war in Iraq could not be stopped by the United Nations. Then how can one call this body relevant anymore? If some country breaks the UNSC resolution, there are no consequences. The World Health Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations and responsible for international public health. And the critics have mentioned the failure of the WHO during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and in its prevention. It did not hold China accountable despite lies that were spread, another sign that the body could now be becoming irrelevant as years pass by. India for years has been pushing for more representation in Security Council on global issues, but the United Nations has been speaking strangely about India lately. In December 2022, Indian Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj mentioned how during the 21-22 tenure as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, there were instances when India had to stand alone, but did not let go of the principles we believe in. Globally, another example is climate change. That is an issue to fight even by the United Nations. But many Western nations often have shifted responsibility on real action despite accused of massive carbon footprint generation and generating trash as well. There's been a lot of talk on climate change, not much action on the ground. So there are 188 member states and 5 nations only act more equal than others at the United Nations. How is it then effective multilateralism? This article by the Guardian newspaper titled 70 years and $500 billion later, what has the UN achieved? Rightly mentions how developing nations regard the UN as undemocratic in politics of the Security Council, dominated by the rich and has ballooning costs. United Nations since inception has managed a lot of good work. Of course, that must be acknowledged. Helping new independent countries to self-govern, help nations in education via the UNICEF, for example, and in public health too. But over the years, specifically in the past few years, widespread criticism of red tapeism, snobbish bureaucracy, and corruption within has emerged. The worst are allegations of lobbying for the top positions. There are thousands of UN personnel on field in health and education. In peacekeeping missions across the world, they are capable and dedicated and are confronting dangers of the world. Unfortunately, there are scandals reported from some countries against these deployments too that have hit the reputations of the UN, specifically with reports of abuse. It is United Nations as an institution at its top leadership that appears to be facing anger at falling short on hope and dreams of its founders. Is the United Nations still stuck in 1945? Coming back to the Kashmir Valley, India as a G20 president has the prerogative to host meetings in any part of the country, and it has already done so. There is of course symbolism and significance of organizing one in Kashmir, which is to show that there is a possible change, that Kashmiris want to see their region return to peace. The working group meeting from 22 to 24th May is on tourism, and that fits Kashmir perfectly, which has recorded tourism as a record turnout in 2022. The summit is expected to bring much-needed relief to the economy of J&K, which has suffered a massive setback due to prolonged turmoil and conflict as well. If I'm correct, one of the UN agendas is to work against terrorism, isn't it? Does the United Nations not like that once a terror hub is turning possibly slowly and steadily into global tourism and an investment hub? And whose life will such initiatives improve? It will be that of the common Kashmiris. Tight security has a reason. Globally designated terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba's proxy TRF and Jaish-e-Mohammed have given out blatant threats of violence during these meetings. And at a time when international level designates are arriving, would a country not ensure steps that are against any explosions that could be planted? This is common sense. Local Kashmiris are seen around public spaces during the meetings because if Kashmir Valley is being spruced up, there is an investment that is being added. Who does it benefit but the locals eventually? Last year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that private investment in J&K now stands at about 38,000 crore rupees. Projects on roads, power, health, education, skill development are being undertaken involving common people. Does this sound like oppression and taking away rights? This is Singapore High Commissioner Simon Wong dressed in traditional attire in Kashmir enjoying the valley. Oscar-winning actor Ram Charan is inviting cinema lovers to come to scenic Kashmir and talk about the stories. These are just one among many views and voices emerging from this summit. India is showing political will against terrorism to try and bring normalcy back to Kashmir. Local Muslims are rising against jihadists, so we do not have another generation of parents losing their children or loved ones to conflict. United Nations should have been appreciating such gestures. Instead, it chose to ride the dying separatist horse. The job of the United Nations is to bring the world together and bring peace. But it appears to be falling and failing that if it supports forces that are backed by Pakistan and not supporting a country trying to reclaim its space and its peace. Thank you for watching.